Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to Meet the Centres. We'd like to begin by welcoming Professor Oriana Baddeley to open the event. Over to you, Oriana.
Hello. I'm so happy to be asked to say just very few words and to welcome you all to this research season event where we're going to find out more about the University of the Arts London Research Centres. I thought it was worth just quickly reminding the audience of how long-standing these centres are. We first started to set up research centres in 2004. Photography in the Archive was the first centre, and we've worked our way through to the most recent centre has been the Centre of Fashion, Business and Innovation. But over those years, what the centres have stood for is a way of bringing critical mass, different types of intelligence to bear on sets of issues that are shared across the colleges of the university. Within the University of the Arts London, the college structure has been incredibly important. But what became very evident in the late 90s and at the beginning of the 21st century was the way in which different work in different colleges was incredibly important in how it could impact on the research trajectories of particular subject areas and particular thematics. And one of the key issues that had to be addressed when research colleagues across the university were trying to set up a centre was, how does this centre become more than something that is very local just to a college? How does it take that incredible deep knowledge embedded in the colleges and share it across a wider community? And all of our centres that you're going to hear more about today have that embeddedness within particular colleges, but have been hugely enriched by the way in which they've worked across the university as a whole. I think it'll be, in a way, very hard to give you any sense of the enormous depth that the centres represent in the short time they're going to be speaking to you. And I would encourage you all to look online and find out more about the amazing projects, funded activities, curriculum development work that has gone on within the centres over the last 15 years. I know you've all been reminded this several times, but I was asked by the organisers to remind you that your mics and cameras are automatically muted during the webinar, that you should accept live transcript if required. Any questions and comments should go to the chat box or the Q&A box. And just again to remind you that the event is being recorded. I'm really honoured now to pass over to Professors Paul Goodwin and Becky Earley, who are going to be your chairs for the afternoon session. Becky, Paul, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Oriana, that lovely introduction. Paul and I are co-chairs of the Research Centre Directors Group, and Paul's got a few words to sort of say about the centres, where we are now really, and the impacts of the pandemic, and how we're looking forward.
Thank you, Becky, and thank you so much, Oriana, for your great introduction. I'm actually gutted to discover that Train wasn't the first research centre. I thought it's PARC, so well done to PARC. And also just to say, Oriana has been such an amazing influence and really important influence for all of the research centres and for shaping the research environment at UAL. I just wanted to say a few words, really, as Becky says, just to kind of shape some of the main points about the centres. I mean, the COVID pandemic has obviously changed the world. It's changed all of us. And of course, UAL is also adapting and changing to that new reality. And the research centres have had to adapt to new models of online working. And through this period, we've formed a new collaborative body, which came out of another body prior to that, called the Research Centres Directors Group, which is as Becky said, is co-chaired by myself and Becky. Today's event really is about showcasing what the centres do and how they do it. But I want to briefly outline a few points about our contribution to UAL and the wider research ecology in art and design. So firstly, I would say that we support research excellence at UAL through the range of REF outputs, research excellence framework outputs, books, exhibitions, articles, knowledge exchange, products, and outreach, etc. Secondly, I think we explore ideas, as Oriana's mentioned, within a community context. The centres provide critical context for UAL researchers to investigate questions in art and design and society. And we offer a space for discourse through our public events and programs. Thirdly, I'd say that we nurture PhD students and we cultivate and mentor early career researchers. It's a really important part of our work. We kind of, to use the terminology, you know, we help to grow the pipeline of new talent in research. Fourthly, we host events and we also host other researchers. So we facilitate exchanges with professors, artists and designers from across the globe, which enable our staff and students to benefit from the rich global talent and dialogue out there. Fifthly, I'd say we teach into the courses and we enhance and innovate the curriculum at UAL, and you'll see examples of that as we go through the presentation today. And then I would say we, as Oriana has already pointed out, we dive deep into research. We dive deep into various issues around art and design, and we explore individual research. We provide an environment for individual research questions to be explored with the support of a community. And we experiment with cutting edge disciplines, and we also create partnerships globally. Finally, again, as Oriana's mentioned, we support our college bases and we navigate the UAL ecosystem, providing an important and critical glue, if you like, that glues things together, and we represent the university externally. So let me pass on now to Becky to complete this. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, really great to hear the recap of who we are, who we feel we are, and what we're doing. But now it's time to actually have a look at the audience, you guys, and what you're hoping to hear and see today. So I'm just going to share my screen and we can take a look at the Menti. So hoping you can all see this now. You should be able to see answers from the audience scrolling up there. We've got a lot of people who have turned up, of course, for the first session. So we're expecting people to maybe come and go a little over the next 3 hours, of course. But people are asking about future directions in general, the overview of our research activities. They want to understand more about the breadth of research interests across the centres, how to set up a centre, a little of that perhaps. So I'm showing you the Menti so that we can maybe understand as directors as we move into our presentations and into our Q&A what the audience would like to hear about. So you can keep this Menti in mind as you begin to present and as we begin to discuss and as the questions come to us. So there's questions there, quite specific ones about the strategies for our future sustainability. So of course that might come up today, but kind of ideas and how we're innovating our way through tricky times. Yes, somebody just wants us to deliver on what we proposed, of course, that's good. It's great to see all the different centres are mentioned here in terms of what people have turned up to find out about. And our synergy and our shared perspectives. That's a great comment. It's something, one of the reasons we wanted to present in this format today was to explore with an audience a little around our shared interests and our synergies and our points of connection. They're growing rapidly day by day. And what's been interesting during the pandemic is the opportunity for us to meet more often, actually. Simple things like setting up a WhatsApp group wasn't something we had before lockdown. And so these conversations, they've always been really rich in terms of sharing ideas across design and art, fine art research. So those points of intersections, they're so important to us, especially when we're sort of looking at issues around identity and decolonization, sustainability, of course, and climate change. These are problems that need to be tackled from many, many different directions. Okay, so I'm going to move forward now. We should get the next slide up. And this is asked, what UAL Research Centre are you familiar with and how? And I wanted to ask this just to get a sense of how experienced our audience is in terms of research centres. Have they worked with one? Are they a PhD student in one? Or are they turning up for the first time, having seen this advertised on Twitter? So all the centres are getting name checked here. And I think it's nice to see that all of them comes up. People want to see the portfolio of research going on. Great, we have Centre for Circular Design, my research centre. They're saying they work there, they're here. That's great, I'm glad you turned up. And a nice comment there, all of them, we're family. There has been more of a sense of families during lockdown. I think there always was before, actually. Myself as a research centre director have been sort of in the driving seat for 10 years, and having other centre directors to talk to in a group and to sort of share best practices and sort of worries has been really important as we move forward. So nice comment about the family. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that now. Bring you back into the room. You should be able to see the lineup again and some of the speakers across the top. Just before we do go into part one, it would be good to just take a moment to use the chat bar, just so that I can make sure that all your fingers are working. So if you go over into the chat bar, if you could just say, if you want your name, but where you're dialing in from today. Let's get a sense of our global reach as well. Berlin, welcome. Freya from Berlin. And hello from Lincolnshire.
Yes, London represented. Okay. Tulse Hill.
India, wonderful. Seattle, Washington.
The mean streets of Surrey. Okay.
Belgium.
And of course, the paradise in Peckham. Absolutely.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, everybody. Well, welcome. You're very welcome. We're really looking forward to your questions later. You can keep the questions coming there in the chat bar, but there is also a Q&A tab, and we'll be checking both of those feeds. So just to let you know how it's going to work, what we've done is designed 3 parts to this event and sort of clustered the centres a little bit around these themes of textiles and fashion, art and archive, identity and community. And what we've decided to do is give each centre the challenge of a 10-minute presentation, and they're all going to run in sequence. And then that group of presenters are going to come together for a panel Q&A. So the first session has 40 minutes now of presentations with 20 minutes of Q&A. So please feel free to put your questions down as we go along, and we'll pick up on them in the Q&A section. But we're also sort of going to take the opportunity to question each other a little bit too. So we're going to sort of probe each other and maybe push each other a little bit in terms of our thinking and our points of connection. So it's the Q&A will take a kind of an internal and external point of view. So I think it would be great now to go into part one, fashion and textiles. And it's a rather sort of strange segue, but Lynn, if you want to go straight into the next slide, I'm going to introduce myself and as Director of Centre for Circular Design, go into that presentation. We're having to do a lot of things ourselves these days, aren't we? My script has gone to sleep. Apologies. Okay. Centre for Circular Design is co-directed by me, Professor Becky Earley, and Dr. Kate Goldworthy, who you'll meet in just a second. It's based at Chelsea College of Arts, where for the last 25 years, we've been pursuing textiles around how to make the textile industry a more sustainable place through design. Next slide, please. The research journey began in industry, in making hand-printed fashion textiles, an experience which led us to become concerned about waste, chemicals, energy use, and water pollution. Working with the textiles teaching team at Chelsea, headed up at that time by Professor Kay Politovich, the Textile Environment Design Research Group evolved into a dynamic, practice-based research culture. Over time, we branched out to join forces with our colleagues at Central St Martin's and London College of Fashion. And for 9 years, we worked together as TFRC, the Textile Futures Research Centre. In 2017, Kate and I founded CCD with the aim of focusing more on the research questions that relate to creating a circular textile industry. We frame these questions by thinking about 3 elements and how they interrelate: materials, models, and mindsets. As a practice-led research centre, CCD's work is anchored in materials and making. Researchers go back to the drawing board and redesign materials for circular systems, from small-scale, handmade, to the larger-scale industrial processes, using craft and traditional techniques, as well as new technologies, to transform the routes that materials take during their life cycle. Central to this approach is collaboration with other makers, with scientists, and with industry. New tools and methods are developed to enable interdisciplinary material development in reference to every stage of the material life cycle, and importantly, with full consideration of circular products, services, systems, and business models. Now, handing over to Kate Goldworthy. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Becky. I think all of this rich history that Becky's described has evolved against a backdrop of really dramatic change in the material space. While the 20th century saw an explosion of the man-made materials we use today, the 21st century will surely be dominated by the development of material recovery technologies, be that cycling back fibres and textiles post-use, or using waste streams from other industries to become new raw material resources. With this shift, design has also had to adapt and expand into a more holistic practice with agency at every point in the materials life cycle. And as we move away from our linear models of making and consumption towards more circular and connected ones, our relationship with materials must also change. How we understand and design products, not as static objects, but as dynamic and evolving systems, is key to a more sustainable future. This approach is core to the practice of circular design. At its most straightforward, we identify material waste streams and reinvent them as new products. And at CCD, we have developed many projects in this way, and still do, with an ever more informed understanding of the wider impacts of our interventions. But this is also coupled with a more proactive approach, bringing end-of-life considerations into the very start of the design process, designing the end at the beginning. We're moving into an incredible era of material recovery and regeneration. Biological raw materials from milk to mushrooms can become semi-synthetic through processing, while the potential chemical recovery of synthetic fibres as new virgin quality resources is surely implies a reinvention of these materials as future renewables. Next slide. Our research is often focused on very specific challenges and opportunities in the creation of circular economies, not least through our ever-evolving group of PhD students. Catherine Hall is redesigning the mechanical recycling process and blending fibres for maximum future value. Lula Mercedes is working with the agricultural waste from the coffee industry in Colombia. Emmeline Child has developed scalable remanufacturing proposals for branded goods, and Letitia Forst has defined design for disassembly, specifically for textiles for the first time. Sane Visser, our newest recruit, is exploring the potential of hair as a viable waste stream for new protein-based fibres, all using design and creativity within the context of a circular material life cycle to affect change. And I think this need to make and test theory through making and materials is core to our work. Our emeritus professor, Kay Politovic, describes it perfectly. I'm driven by the idea that I want to make something that embodies a change, however small the change or however large, making it intimately tied to research, and in creating new knowledge. As our projects have necessarily become more collaborative, we find ourselves designing new tools and methods to facilitate these collaborations. Through these actions, we begin to understand how design can contribute not only in creating new circular materials and products, but also in improving sustainability at every stage of the life cycle, defining, then refining that cycle. The need to find ways to work with multiple stakeholders from outside of design is essential for this truly systemic view. And at the heart of CCD is a desire to connect our research to its useful application, to simultaneously propose and test our ideas through embedded research and knowledge exchange in a real world context. And over to you again, Becky.
Thank you. Next slide, please. The landscape of circular design is constantly evolving as industry and end users adapt and respond to new propositions. CCD recognises that in order to move towards circularity, new models must be developed, tested and validated to challenge the status quo. In the applied research, this has included a new methodology for circular design-driven work, a new service model for long-life garments, as well as short-life materials to support a model for ultra-fast, light fashion, and a model for social cohesion in complex collaborations. Models are a central feature of the Centre's approach as a way for our researchers to communicate the new ways of working, thinking, and producing their exploring to a wider audience. New roles for designers are beginning to become ever more apparent as we pursue our research. This feeds into our work in education. Next slide, please. Circularity cannot be achieved without collaboration or behaviour change. Within the mindsets theme, CCD researchers seek to enable designers, end users, and collaborators from a diverse range of disciplines to move towards circular ways of thinking, working, and being that enable decision-making within the circular context. Workshops are an important mode for exploring mindsets, leading participants on a journey of discovery which will open their eyes to alternative practice. Toolkits enable mindset shifts to be effective beyond the workshop into the everyday. CCD works to encourage a step change in thinking, particularly with industry and science-based collaborators, as well as the general public. And so this slide is about a new venture that we launched last year on the 8th of October, which is a coming together of industry and us as researchers, really, to explore and to make real the interconnections and the roadmaps towards a future fully circular industry. So this is sort of, in a way, testament to the collaborations that we've built over the years. During lockdown, we started to have online conversations, which were hosted by Cindy Rhodes at Worn Again Technologies, and Gwen Cunningham from Circular Economy Amsterdam joined in then with Kate and I. And we brought people into sort of mass discussions, really, sort of 50 people at a time online, all from industry, talking about what was changing, how the pandemic was impacting on practices and plans, and sharing roadmaps, really, what they were planning to do, how they were trying to accelerate towards change. And so World Circular Textiles Day was born with the idea that we would host through a platform lots of people's roadmaps. We would create visions for how to achieve complete circularity by 2050. And so I'm going to hand back to Kate now to just wrap up the presentation and talk a little bit about how you can get involved and find out more about the work that we're doing here.
So next slide, thank you. Oh, back one. So as Becky says, the key theme of this project really is to try and shape a positive shared vision of the future and provide a roadmap to get there. It aims to accelerate that change through this collective action and combined intelligence from all the partners that you saw on the previous page, but hopefully many more still to join. And I think for us, it's been a great sort of focus for much of our existing and ongoing research activity to contribute to this collective understanding. Recent projects relate to, for example, a roadmap of circular synthetics and actions for design, which is what's showing on this slide. A review of the charities sector in a project called Chariosity, which Becky leads on. The building of a knowledge hub with our partners at Circular Economy to capture the broadest picture of industry progress, and an exploration of data through dynamic real-time visualization, which we're currently working on. So I think, you know, the potential for this is hugely exciting for us, and we would love many more people to join us on this journey. Final slide, please. So just to wrap up, with a small call for action, really. Firstly, if you're interested in World Circular Textiles Day, please go to our website and sign up to find out more. And all of our research projects and you know, the full breadth of our work at CCD can be found on our website and through our Instagram channel. So that's the first centre done. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward now to introducing the next in this session. I have great pleasure in introducing Professor Finola Kerrigan, who's Director of the Fashion Business Research Centre at LCF, and she's here to discuss the centre in terms of its work with 3 of the UAL sort of key research themes: living with environmental change, health and well-being, and digital futures. And I'll pass over to Finola now. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Kate. And I'm delighted to be here today to talk about the Fashion Business Research Centre. I'm Finola Kerrigan. I'm the Professor of Marketing and the Director of the Fashion Business Research Centre, and we are definitely new kids on the block in terms of the UAL Research Centre. So I look in awe at the great work that's been done by my colleagues up until this point. The Fashion Business Research Centre provides a home for fashion business focused research, and is located in London College of Fashion. And as a business school that's located within an arts university, we have a unique position in working at the intersection of creativity, innovation, business, and emerging technologies. It's necessary also for contemporary business schools to consider their broader position within society. While some business schools and researchers see themselves as serving business, perhaps a more appropriate model for our times is that academic research should act as part of a critical friendship with business and wider society. Armed with insight into the workings of the fashion industry from a business perspective, research within our centre considers that need to balance consideration for planet, people, purpose, and profit. And with that in mind, since I joined at UAL in September, we've been reviewing our existing research strengths and identifying areas that we would like to enhance. So we can go to the next slide, please. We've identified 3 key areas of research which we see as strengths currently and areas that we'd like to invest in going forward. So we're very fortunate to be working within a university which takes climate change seriously, and we benefit from proximity to some of the most cutting-edge research on fashion and sustainability, notably from colleagues in the Centre for Sustainable Fashion and in colleagues for the Centre for Circular Design, who we've just heard from. We know so much about the damage to the environment that's being caused by the fashion industry through production, distribution, and consumption and disposal practices. This is an important area of research that we will invest in order to investigate how to develop research through analytical and creative practice, which can increase our understanding of environmental change, communicating issues surrounding this change, and designing for new business models, social innovations, and sustainable living. Our approach allows us to draw on foundational social science disciplines such as psychology, sociology, economics, finance, and so on, in order to inform our research on current business practices and future necessary innovations and business models, policy, consumer behavior, and sustainable finance. While addressing the damage done through overproduction, overconsumption, and the interconnection between business and contemporary capitalism's desire for unsustainable growth can be viewed by some as anti-business, taking an approach which understands that businesses are made up of people who inhabit a planet and confront these tensions on a daily basis is essential if we're going to make inroads in this area. We will be no friend to business if we fail to take a critical approach to fashion business research in this regard. And the importance of this area is evident through the number of current and potential future doctoral students we have working on these particular topics. We can go to the next slide, please. So alongside understanding of the impact of overconsumption on the health of the planet, researchers at the Centre are also concerned with the impact on health and well-being of people. We've seen an increasing focus on the role of business in contributing to overconsumption, ill health, negative mental health impact, and so on. And researchers in the Centre are actively working on projects on working in fashion, fashion consumption, disability, and the fashion industry and health and well-being in the cosmetic science field. Colleagues will be presenting this research later today in a session focused on fashion and well-being at 5:45, and you are all very welcome to join us there to hear more about that interesting research. And again, this research will ensure that we produce research that matters to society, as well as improving business practice. And this is another area that current and future doctoral students are actively engaged in. So next slide, please. This brings us to the final area that we currently focus on in our research activities. So we are living in a digital age, and there's no denying that the current pandemic has really placed the role of emerging technologies in shaping our everyday realities to the fore. We've been very fortunate in the Centre for Fashion Business Research that we've been able to work alongside the Fashion Innovation Agency in developing research to complement projects that they've been actively engaged in. Colleagues from the Centre have been able to work on the Digital Human project in collaboration with the Fashion Innovation Agency and Microsoft, and the virtual e-commerce experience with AnimXR and Pangaea. This allowed us to bring our research on marketing and consumption to the world of immersive technology. And moving forward, this need to balance considerations of the impact of technological innovations on the planet and overall well-being is essential. So we see the intersection of our areas of focus in the Centre, meaning that emerging technology-focused research will not be considered as separate from that engaged with sustainability and well-being, but consideration of the importance of emerging technology will incorporate understanding of the possible broader positive and negative impacts that such technology will bring. Colleagues associated with the Centre have published their work on the impact of emerging technologies in leading journals and edited collections, and we're very well placed to move forward and innovate in this area. So we can move to the next slide, please. Okay. So we're very fortunate at University of the Arts London that our students are seen as key stakeholders in and beneficiaries of broader research culture. And our ability to input into the curriculum and engage with our students with this research is really essential. Opportunities such as those already provided by the Collaborative Challenge Unit, for example, which engages our postgraduate community, demonstrates the coherence between our research focus and the concerns and interests of our students. As we move forward, we hope to engage more with the other research centres in tackling issues that are central to all of our work, but benefiting from the different approaches that we can bring together to this particular area of research. So in conclusion, although as a business school, we might seem as the outliers within a creative and arts university, we see that our approach is deeply complementary with other colleagues within UAL and within the other research centres. So that is the conclusion of my talk. And next I will pass over to, I believe, the Centre for Sustainable Fashion with Dilys Williams and Naomi Builliard. Thank you very much.
Greetings, everybody. Can you all hear me and see me now? Yes, actually, I'm assuming that nobody else can speak, and so I'm assuming everybody can hear me and see me. And thank you very much, Lynn, for taking over the controls. Thank you so much, Finola, for introducing us, and to Becky and Kate and Paul before that. It's great to be able to be part of this amazing community. It's a real privilege to work with all of the other centres, and it's something that I think for us is very important to our work. So today, both myself, Dilys Williams, and Naomi Builliard, who's Head of Strategy at the Centre, are going to introduce our work. So I'm going to go up first. Lynn, if you have the presentation ready, then we can hit go. Okay, thank you very much. Centre for Sustainable Fashion developed actually out of a questioning by students, tutors, researchers and designers of their discipline and their livelihoods. And we see design as possibility creating over problem solving, and fashion as a social practice of making together, mediated by the products that we call attire. We realise that demonstrating cultures of sustainability and making them public is something that we're very well placed to convene. And we also think that working with micro and small business is something that is incredibly important to us. UAL has the highest proportion of UK graduates doing their own thing, and we can see that there's another now already existing in their work. We teach radical sustainability in the courses that we've developed, and through participatory design with students and with tutors in and beyond course levels, we engage in a critical discourse of how and where and with whom fashion can place earth and equity first. And for us, publishing our research in a range of academic publications, as well as for wider audiences, helps us to share ideas that have been explored with rigor and in depth. We exchange knowledge with designers in big businesses as well, where risks and opportunities can be quite different from working at a smaller scale. Here, trust, honesty, and a place to try are really vital components that we found. Fashion can also prick up the ears of parliamentarians and many others, and make what seems apparently distant in terms of climate and social injustice much more human and close in scale. And to navigate the intersections of climate, societal, cultural and economic sustainability, we've created a framework for designing. It has emerged out of our own extended practice. We understand that collaboration and participation involves questions of control, vulnerability, power and agency, and we grapple with these questions and of the expectations in co-creation between people who are researchers, students, citizens, industry professionals and others. We seek to join both with known and unknown networks of people across disciplines, geographies and belief systems that draw on tacit knowledge and situated learning, all sorts of sources of knowledge that maybe academia doesn't always work with. We take a pluralistic approach to our work and work across scales of transformation from what is to practicing fashion otherwise, imagining the world we want to live in. Our current themes cross research, education, and knowledge exchange and are mapped across these scales. They are cultures of sustainability. It's about designing fulfilling work. It's about products that can be cherished. And it's about scenarios and cultural probes that demonstrate that people contribute as well as consume. Sufficiency offers us an opportunity to look at a counter narrative to the blinkered economic growth mantra. It explores elements of fashion that are often outside of commercial transaction. Ecological literacy helps us to create language in fashion that goes beyond mechanistic, technocentric approach to fashion and to sustainability. It connects deep ecology, ecofeminism, and with terms that resonate with fashion journalists around the world. Action in climate emergency involves us engaging in an emergency mindset, to look at how we can work with exceptional nimbleness and to practice resilience. Post-human thinking relates to a philosophical post-humanism that expands the circle of moral concern beyond the human species. It looks at the ethical implications of Earth First. Social, racial, gender, and intergenerational justice explores the intersectionality of sustainability and what we need to change in our own practice, as well as in the wider fashion sector. Community resilience is about creating conditions for participation, where the role of design switches from products to making spaces and places. And practices of care and well-being has moved from being a sort of implicit to an explicit theme in our work. It explores activities and relationships of fashion as acts of care. And very importantly for us, we remember that practices of well-being involve us enjoying each other's company, as you can see here with our final slide that is really about what we did at the beginning of lockdown together. So I'm now going to pass over to Naomi, who's going to talk a little bit more about our work. Thank you, Naomi.
Thank you. Can we have the next slide, please? Slightly embarrassing picture there, but so I'm Naomi. I'm head of strategy at CSF. The core themes as presented by Dilys are one of the key components of our 5-year strategy, providing direction and contextualizing our aims and objectives. I'm going to present some of the elements of our strategy and our ways of working. Next slide, please. We see CSF as an ecosystem, a participatory learning ecosystem that provides the conditions to develop knowledge, skills, and capabilities in fashion design for sustainability across professionals of the industry, students, graduates, practitioners, and the wider community. We engage in participatory design practices through our work in education across London College of Fashion and with other academic partners, through world-leading research, and with our collaboration and knowledge exchange with brands, NGOs, local and international communities. Our work aims to develop agency to critically respond and act on the climate, health, and equity crisis through fashion. And next slide, please. We take a multi-strand approach to fashion design for sustainability and participatory practices by means of a diverse portfolio of projects and collaborations related to intervention points across the 3 scales of transformation: awareness, ideation, and shift. Next slide, please. Projects and activities at awareness level are about ensuring an understanding of fashion and sustainability, a realization with broad reach. So an example of our work at this level is our MOOC, a 6-week free online course co-created with our long-standing partner Kerrigan, which has reached over 72,000 learners across the globe currently. This year, we're also creating 4 new MOOCs, 4 new online courses as part of our fashion values projects. And there's many ways in which you can engage with fashion values. So I suggest you check our social media or our website for more information. Next slide, please. The ideation, so ideation level is about testing what can be. So examples of projects at this level include bespoke research and innovation, many of our industry and academia collaboration, as well as some of co-learning with our communities. We were asked as an example by Condé Nast to facilitate a workshop with 30 of their editors-in-chief globally to identify a number of projects that would create the most impact in terms of sustainability. This has led to the co-creation of the first sustainable fashion glossary as a way to drive change in media and publishing. Next slide, please. Project and activities at the shift level have Earth and equity as a starting point to develop cultures and practices of sustainability in action. So Earth Logic Fashion Action Plan, for example, was conceived as a radical invitation to put Earth first, asking for a paradigm shift from the logic of economic growth to an Earth logic. It's an action research as there is a need to explore as well as make changes at the same time. Next slide, please. Our work is made possible through our networks and partnerships, both internally at LCF across UAL, as well as externally with businesses large and small, UK and international academic partners, governmental and third sector organization, and other stakeholders in and outside of fashion. Next slide, please. Our aims and objectives reflect our work not only in research, but in teaching and learning, in policy development and knowledge exchange, from producing new work and perspectives in transformation design, challenging reductionist and detrimental narratives in fashion, to developing capabilities of future change makers, as well as evidencing practices of care. Our guiding principles and code of conduct that you can see here reflect our ways of working. We're constantly reminded of our interdependencies with the earth, with each other, and with the planet. We need to hold ourselves accountable. This means taking ownership of our actions as well as our inaction. We recognize individuality and multiplicity as an advantage, because what we need now is plural ways of knowing, doing, and communicating to shift the mindsets towards regenerative fashion cultures and practices. Last slide, please. So this is, in short, Center for Sustainable Fashion. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I think I should be introducing Professors Amy de la Haye and Judith Clarke, co-directors of Center for Fashion Curation.
Thank you. My name's Amy de la Haye, and I'm Professor of Dress History and Curatorship at London College of Fashion, and I'm Joint Director with Professor Judith Clarke for the Centre for Fashion Curation. Next slide, please. The Centre for Fashion Curation was established in 2013, and we foreground innovative, rigorous, inclusive and socially responsible exhibition making, curatorship and archival research. I've used this slide so that people can come back and look at it in detail, but I'm not going to ponder the whole content. We use fashion in our title, although we do engage with dress in its broadest sense. We work with dress of all types. And in our various ways, we explore the specificities of this creative, compelling, poignant, and actually really quite awkward media, and its potential to tell stories about lives lived and explore ideas about the way we live. Next slide, please. As I say, my slides are providing a backdrop. I don't have time, unfortunately, to ponder or discuss the content. Unlike some of the other centres, we don't work in a centre that has the potential to generate a lot of money. But that said, we do manage to get most of our projects funded. So we don't always bring in a lot of money, but we also don't cost a lot of money either. Next slide, please. As you can see from Judith's work, we also have very good international relationships. We work with museums and institutions around the world, public institutions, private institutions, commercial institutions, and individuals. Next, please. Our work is inclusive. We work hard to work with communities to upskill, and we actively engage with social responsibility. Next slide, please. We've also, in recent years, tried actively to forge close working relationships with other major institutions. One of these is the Fashion Institute of Technology. Excuse me. The head of the museum, Dr. Valerie Steele, talks to our students each year. We open it up to the college and then she talks to them individually. And I'm currently supervising a curator, Colleen Hill, for her PhD. And this is my project, which is opening in the next couple of months at FIT. Next, please. Of all the 3 professors who are based in the centre, we've all variously worked at the V&A. We all teach on the MA Fashion Curation course, which I'll talk about more in a moment. And this is an exciting project I'm showing you because it started as a project with César Hennestroza, who was one of Judith and mine's PhD students. The first iteration of the exhibition was in Mexico, where CSA worked with Judith. And then it went to the V&A, and from which you can see a slide here. And now I should say that CSA is actually studying for a PhD with us. Sorry, could we go back one? As a centre, we're really trying to actively develop how, as a university, we teach practice-based and practice-led PhDs. And we've taken on a lot of students in recent years. We've had a growing increase in demand for supervision. And Judith and I are really quite keen to lead or work closely with the university to develop this area, which really is quite distinctive to us in terms of PhD supervision. We're a small team, we work closely, we're collegiate, we try and, as I say, upskill our staff. Our centre manager, Ben Wyman, Dr. Ben Wyman, studied for the MA with us. He recently completed his PhD, which was funded by LCF, and we very much hope that the university, even in straitened times, will continue to support the professional development of colleagues in this way. Next, please. This is one of Alison Maloney's incredible projects. She came to work on an international programme, and the Cabinet project was a project which took exhibitions to communities who couldn't otherwise come to museums. They were a women's prison, a residential care home, and a self-referral mental health unit. And the cabinets changed regularly and workshops were undertaken in each of these venues. We're now actively trying to work with Alison to secure seed funding for a project with Museum Africa, which houses a collection of over 16,000 items of dress dating from the 1800s to the late 20th century that were predominantly donated by white South Africans, and as such, they're steeped in colonial histories. So Alison has developed a project where she's going to work with the artist Wanda Lefoto and Erica de Grief, who's co-founder of the African Fashion Research Institute, to explore the hidden and omitted histories that this extraordinary collection might unearth. In the last 2 or 3 years, we really have tried to increase the geographic breadth and scope of our work. And in the last couple of months, we've forged an exciting working relationship with Mark Lewis and Athanasios Velios. We'd hoped it was going to be developed into a Leverhulme bid. It was disappointing, it didn't, but on a positive scale, we're going to work together with Kinshasa University to develop a project that we hope will be really quite exciting and for which the university's offered some seed funding. Next, please. Dr. Jeffrey Horsley was Judith and mine's PhD student. He's a postdoctoral research fellow in the centre, and he's also course leader for MA Fashion Curation. and this is one of the projects that he developed. In the last few hours, we've had the most incredible news, which is that he, working closely with Ben Wyman and Brigitte, our administrator, and Jane Gibb at the university, has just been given an informal offer from the AHRC securing about £250,000 to work on a project to develop a toolkit, working with regional museums, with their curators there and working closely with their collections. So at the outset of my presentation, I said we haven't raised a lot of money because to date we haven't. We have been successful. We've won 9 of 11 bids, but they were all reasonably small. And winning this one is just extraordinary. And it's literally, we've only been allowed to announce it this afternoon. So congratulations to Jeff, and we're completely excited about that. Next, please. We work closely with Susanna Cordner. She's a member of the centre. With the archive, our students work closely with the archive. A lot of them develop their projects from it. Our PhD students explore the histories that items in the archive they develop stories from the archive. And this is an exhibition that Susanna exhibited in the Fashion Space Gallery. Next, please. We're very, very interested in documenting practice. We're not a new discipline, but we're not a discipline with a very long history. And whilst the museum catalogues tend to get kept, quite often the record of the exhibition doesn't, especially when it predates the internet. So we're actively working on retrieving exhibitions and exploring the history of exhibitions. So in 2019, we staged a whole project which looked at the 25 years of the street style exhibition that I'd curated at the V&A in 1994. Next, please. And it's especially thrilling when amongst the histories we retrieve are exhibitions that have been curated by our students. We launched the MA Fashion Curation in 2006, and lots of our students have gone on to do absolutely incredible work. And I'd now like to pass to Judith, please.
Thanks very much. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? I hope someone can.
Yes, thank you, Judith. Yes.
You can, yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, well, I'm going to belt through a few slides. I want to speak about a project, a website that we aim to launch in the coming weeks and months. So it's an exciting addition to Amy's presentation. It's born of a research project and publication that you can see here. That was put together by 3 members of the MA teaching team, Professor Amy de la Haye, Jeff Horsley and myself in 2014, scrutinising one exhibition, which was Beaton's 1971 anthology of fashion staged at the V&A, and which appeared to us to hold many of the attributes of the contemporary fashion exhibition, or what that seemed to have become. Next slide. So Amy de la Haye tracked its roots, its curatorial and collecting policies, next slide. I scrutinised the exhibition making tools and references that were folded into it as a kind of close reading of the exhibition as kind of exploded out and exploded in. Next slide. And Jeff Horsley started, the following one. Jeff Horsley started what he described as his incomplete inventory of exhibitions, which clearly charted a kind of rise in fashion exhibitions from 1971 and sort of showed what this particular discipline, it was sort of like starting to track the discipline. And the book was addressed primarily to our students and used the 1971 case study to critically assess an exhibition It was an invitation to read it closely, but also formed what felt like a kind of open template. Next slide. So with this in mind, we wanted to put together a website that used and sort of took on the book's name to reflect many of its aspirations, now 50 years after the Beaton exhibition. So the aim was it to become a kind of a list of fashion exhibitions as comprehensive as possible, and built of course on Jeff's initial list. With its specialist brief, it felt that this was a kind of a possibility, you know, that it was ring-fenced by its specificity, and that it was something that we feel is in time doable. But also, more importantly, it was an opportunity to scrutinize those exhibitions afresh and their absences, which are, needless to say, our contemporary mandate. And so to continually track its practices. Next slide. So organized by year, it creates different snapshots, kind of vertically and horizontally through chronologies, through themes, etc. And it's an opportunity to kind of problematize the practices, from curatorial decisions to the words used on press releases. Next slide. It's allowed us to expand the reach of the centre and to create global partnerships. The centre is able to create a kind of hub, which in turn is turned into a kind of freely available digital resource, which is so key this year, of course. And so identifying as many gaps as it is information. Next slide. Words, of course, taken from press releases are words that are themselves now objects of our collections, and to scrutinize the use of them both as key words to navigate the site, but also offering themselves up for questioning. So looking at shifts in language, of course. Next slide. So what we do is we look at an exhibition. If you look to the right-hand side, and the next slide, please, you can see an example of a commissioned response. I have just one more slide, and this is important, that this is our invitation for you to look at our site, but the responses are where we're expanding the critical remit of the project, and by inviting diverse responses to the exhibitions listed on the site. And hopefully this will continue to reframe and reclassify them and question the conditions of their production, and the urgency of which is highlighted across all the centres today. Thank you very much.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks to all the presenters. It would be great, Tommaso, to stop sharing the screen now and actually invite the speakers to turn their cameras on and their mics on and come in for a panel. Also to invite any other directors to join if you want to come and ask questions. You'd be very, very welcome to join this session. There were some questions sort of flowing in the chat bar there. So maybe I'll pick one to get going with. I think, Kate, you had one for Dilys and Naomi about working with SMEs.
Hi there, Becky.
Hello, sorry, classic unmute moment. Yeah, I was really fascinated, and I wholeheartedly sort of agree with your excitement at working with SMEs and you know, the smaller micro businesses. And I just wondered if you could talk a bit more about, you know, what you think that enables, how it differs from the kind of work that we do and must do with the bigger companies.
Hi, Kate. Thank you for your question. Yeah, I mean, for us, I think we've always had this kind of parallel working with the big and the small. And I think the why it's particularly interesting is I think that a lot of the narrative around sustainability, and certainly a lot of the legislation and a lot of the business support, has been aimed at big businesses. And we've realised through our Fostering Sustainable Practices project, and here I'll do a quick plug, we've got an event this afternoon, so thanks for giving me the opportunity to plug it, that there's all sorts of practices already going on in small businesses, but they don't match what the criteria of big businesses are saying they're looking for, or that government says it's looking for. So I think, and also, and as I said, you know, a lot of our graduates go on to do their own thing. I think recently it said on Canvas that more UAL graduates start their own business than any other UK university. So we are seeing that these businesses are trying things out, but and there are a lot of them really humble and really resilient, and in some ways because of that they don't actually necessarily get the support that they deserve. They kind of carry on anyway. So what we've done through the Fostering Sustainable Practices project is to develop a set of exemplars of what this looks like. And I think that the thing that we have found as a sort of point of intervention is we've developed actually a guidebook for what we call intermediaries. So it's not about offering ways in which the small businesses themselves can maybe do things better, because they're already doing it. It's how can those who invest in those businesses, those that showcase those businesses, those that support those businesses, recognize what's in front of them. So that's kind of what we've found as being really important in that work. I hope that answers the question.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank
Very
you.
much. Yeah. Any other questions? I've got a few I can pull up, but just going to open the floor up for anybody.
I had a quick question, Becky, if that's okay. I just wanted to know, I mean, we've all faced this situation, as I mentioned at the beginning about the pandemic. And I wondered how you all kind of, what was the process of reacting to that, and how you kind of changed your operational model in some respects to respond to working online, and you know, how that process sort of took place.
Who would you like to answer?
As anyone, actually. Just,
I'd like to answer because I'm the only one who started during the pandemic. So I've never met a single human in real life. And when people even talk about the institution, I mean, I know the buildings, some of them from walking past, but I don't really know a lot of the environment. So for me, everything has been online. And I think the biggest thing that I've enjoyed is the ability for events like this to connect with people all around the world and to overcome some of my nervousness around doing so much online. But at the same time, I think what's missing are the casual interactions that you get, where you get, you know, you don't always want to be performing. Sometimes you just want to be kind of exchanging knowledge and so on. But it's been brilliant to be able to connect to people in this way. And also a lot of these events are recorded. So we have a record of the engagements that we have. They don't just disappear into the ether. So I find that brilliant. And some of that I'm definitely going to incorporate going forward.
Brilliant answer.
I really, sorry, Becky. I was just going to say, I really agree. You know, all of these amazing new tools that we're getting familiar with as well. You know, some of the ways we've managed to get around losing those kind of round the table moments has been kind of brilliant in terms of it leaving a trace, which I think is an interesting kind of new set of methods we'd like to continue. You know, we can build things online together collaboratively in an easier way, perhaps. Becky?
Yeah, you said it, Kate, that's great. I actually want to use the time to come to Amy and Jude. Thanks for your presentation, guys. And Street Style 1994. Amy, I didn't realise I was in that show, and we've never talked about it, but actually Gavin Fernandez got me to make some stuff and photographed it, and as a result the V&A actually acquired the pieces I'd made. So that was a real flashback there. But my question's really about I've been interested in some time in the relationship between what museums are kind of curating and collecting from this conversation of sustainable textiles and fashion, and just really how you would approach that, or any thoughts you've got about any particular aspects of this sort of transition to a better industry that we should be really noting?
If I was working in a museum, I think I'd have a much more clear strategy, because even in the early 1990s, I felt quite strongly we acquired close by you. I think there was someone called Sarah Ratty, some other eco designers. So I did feel very strongly that although I worked in an elite cultural institution, I wanted to broaden the visitor profile and experience, and also diversify the collections. And at the time, the criteria was design that led. And so I could argue quite politicized design, saying this is the design that leads today. In terms of sustainable fashion today, I think you'll find that the major institutions are collecting it. But the sustainability extends beyond the object, because the real issue for the museums is quite often not acquiring the clothes or choosing which clothes to acquire. It's how you store them, because the storage is of such premium. And museums are cutting their curatorial staff, especially the curatorial staff who don't do front of house work, so the curatorial staff who care for those collections. So, I would argue, yes, we need to collect evidence of sustainable fashion, but we also need to ensure that our collections are sustainable by investing in them and investing in the staff.
Yeah, it's important not.
But
yeah, I mean, actually, that conversation about sort of sustainability in its sort of economic sense is important, as well as sort of understanding that changing field. And that brings us to a question from the audience, really, which is it's kind of about us as centres and the mechanisms of a centre, and how we got started, and how might a group of researchers, or a single researcher even at UAL or elsewhere, get going towards a centre. If they like the look of how a centre works, what might be your advice to anyone out there that wants to grow something? Go on, back to you, Amy. You put your hand up.
From the lowest tech person in the world, who has had more stress about teaching during the pandemic than I've had in 20 years in my life. So I would say they should join a WhatsApp group and maybe do stuff on Instagram as a start, because I've started Instagram during lockdown and I've got into all sorts of networks that I never would have known about. I didn't know there was an Asian fashion archive. I didn't know, I've discovered all these archives and collectives. And today someone started following me, and they do podcasts called History of something like Obscure Objects. And I think you can do these things that cost nothing, that get your work into the public domain.
Great.
So I would suggest doing something like that.
So definitely using digital technology to sort of speed things up, make connections, do it free, very accessible, and really building the community in whatever way you can, either on campus, off campus.
And your work in the public domain, Becky, because I think at the moment it's really hard for students to get placement opportunities. And if you were going to employ someone, if they said we couldn't do this, we couldn't do that, but this is what we did, and they showed you, that they'd been resilient, they'd been resourceful, they'd set up something, it's impressive.
Absolutely. There's a couple of other questions to come in, and I think, but Finola, you're the most recent sort of centre to get set up. So what advice would you have to anybody else, maybe from another area of expertise, to sort of get going and galvanise support?
Yeah, it's a bit different for me, I think, than the journey of other centres, because the idea for the centre didn't come from me. So it came from the need to find a focus for this kind of research within UAL. And then I was recruited. So, but I still have had to go around and try to understand what are the strengths, the research strengths, what's the coherence. And for me, the biggest part of that was to get colleagues who are interested to not think about themselves in terms of their subject areas or their disciplines, but to try and really think about what were the common themes in their work that you could unite them, in an interdisciplinary way. And so that's been great. So I think if you're thinking of setting up a centre, I think a key skill is that you can get people to maybe look at their work in a different way and to think about how they can break out of any kind of boundaries they put around themselves, because otherwise I don't know what the point of a centre is. You know, the idea of the centre is to really galvanise people rather than silo people. So that would be kind of a key thing, I think.
Excellent. I thoroughly back that. Going to go now to a question actually about the student experience and really maybe logistical barriers of moving between the conversations of centres. So as you can see here, we're 4 centres having a conversation together, actually live and public for the first time, and then doing this sort of Q&A of each other. But, you know, what about the students? How, if you're a PhD student in one area, how would you interconnect? How would you connect to the conversations going on in other centres? And maybe if you've got to get something going yourself to make that happen, what would you do? Dilys.
Hi, Becky. I'll answer that question, but I also want to go back to the previous question, and it's great to know you're in street style. I think that, you know, we're all around, we're all quite visible, and Amy just talked about Instagram, but I think that, yeah, contacting us, and we all speak to each other, as you say. So, and I think somebody's put something in the chat about being based in one place but wanting to connect to others. So, yeah, whether it's an Instagram message or whether it's an email, I think that all of us want to be able to make those connections, and you know, our work benefits from it. We all benefit from being able to be connected to each other. So really what Finola said as well, you know, we don't want to work in silos. But seeing as I've got this chance then, going back to the question of you being in street style and what Amy was talking about, you know, the political nature of our work and the political nature of our research. And I wonder whether, you know, when you did street style, Amy, you know, you were talking about doing something that was design led, and, you know, the whole idea around sustainability was a political message. It was standing up against what was going on in our country at the time. And I wonder whether you feel as if and this is maybe a question to all of us, do you feel as if we can be as political, and in what ways can we be political whilst being within a big establishment?
Well, I don't know, I would say the industry's become more politicised than ever before in the last 10 years. And I think that certainly feeds into education, and not least because our students are so politicised. So we need to really keep on top of things, you know, for the sake of our students as well as within our own practice. So I think after years of, you know, things not being terribly political, maybe since the late 1970s, to me it's a thrilling time, because we've got especially young people and students and things who really care passionately and are really politicised. And I mean, that's a brilliant thing. It's a shame the reasons why they've been so provoked is a shame, but the fact that they are active is brilliant.
Yeah, it is an exciting time in terms of us, you know, being professors and having our areas of knowledge and our areas of expertise, but having that openness that Finola talked about, that ability to sort of work across and change and shift and move with the times. I'll come to you in a second, Finola. You had your hand up, but I want to kind of come to the last question, actually. Now I've just had the 1 minute warning there. About funded PhDs, and it's come from another member of staff, but, you know, how can we get more funded PhDs so more of these brilliant young people, maybe politicized sort of viewpoints, come and work with us and sort of, you know, drive the change through? Any last ideas, thoughts on funded PhDs? Come on. Yes.
I think there's a need and a little bit of a demand once we start talking about it, about asking businesses and brands to pay for these PhDs, because once they realize the potential that they can do, having an academic supervising in university and being placed in industry and having that direct cross-working, it's a benefit to all. So really, for businesses to start understanding, and for us to maybe disseminate that, what sort of funded PhDs can provide to both parties and how we're both working in the same direction that way, I think should be what funders look out to fund and to sort of facilitate next.
And Naomi, do you not think, I also think really strongly that the university should continue to invest in staff obtaining a PhD, not only because on the whole they feed back and teach the students, but it's also a way of retaining really talented staff by investing in them, upskilling them, even in a time of economic hardship.
I agree, and also particularly with practice-based PhDs, I think sometimes we go very much the academic route and remembering the makers and the practice-based practitioners and how maybe the university can do something about those that not necessarily have funding elsewhere.
Thank you, everyone. We're out of time, and we were just getting going with the nitty-gritty of funding research and more students. But we're gonna take a break now and invite you all to come back for 1:45 for session 2. So stay tuned, turn your cameras and mics off, panelists, and see everybody at 1:45. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. Hope you managed to go and grab a quick sandwich or something. We're now moving into session 2, part 2, the art and the archives, which will work in the following way. We have 3 research centres, Afterall, CRiSAP and PARC. They're each going to present for 10 minutes, and then there'll be a 30-minute Q&A at the end. So I'd like to invite Professor Mark Lewis from Afterall to please come and present.
Sorry, I had my, I was on mute. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you and see you.
And I've got it on. Okay, I just heard a bit of an echo. Good afternoon, and Becky, thank you so much for and Paul for organizing this, and it's great to see everyone out today. All of my colleagues in the research centers. I have to do a big shout out to Oriana. She's already been thanked profusely, but I just want to say that it's been really, really wonderful working with Oriana over the last 5 years. And one of the reasons why we're all getting together, I think, is in part because of her impetus and her support of the centers. And it's already, Oriana, a huge hole in our collective work, not having you there, not having someone to guide and to speak to us and to help us. Let me just shut the door. Someone's talking outside. Okay. Let's hope someone comes in who can provide the support that you've done historically. Afterall was started in when I first came to Canada, from Canada to the United Kingdom in 1997, along with my friend and colleague, Charles Escher, Professor Charles Escher. We started a journal called Afterall, which I'm going to now. Sorry, I don't have any slides, but hopefully you can see this. I gotta, shit. Well, I smashed my iPhone this morning, so I can't get all the. Okay, I'm gonna have to give up on that. Sorry. Thank you. Sorry, Lynn. I was muted again. This is, Afterall, this is our current issue. It's issue 50. So we've had 50 issues. This is embossed here as issue 50. And over the years, we've had a number of international partners that have funded and diversified our editorial work. And these partners include the Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong, Bard College in Hudson, New York, Museum of Art in Sao Paulo, CalArts in Los Angeles, University of Toronto, obviously in Toronto, NTU in Singapore, and University of Chicago, MUCA in Antwerp, the Van Abbe in Eindhoven, and I think I've got them all now. So these are all editorial partners, financial partners who contribute to the cost and to the production of our various research projects. We have a number of research projects. We have exhibition histories, which is curated and directed by colleagues Lucy Steeds, Charles Escher, and they have worked over the years to produce 10 volumes of the history of exhibitions. They're now working on institutional histories. They produce this work with their partners in Hong Kong and in New York. The journal produces its projects with, as I've talked about, with partners in Sao Paulo, Toronto, MUCA, and recently Singapore. And then we have another project that's called, I wonder if I can take my computer over, and you'll see them all. Seem to have lost. Sorry, am I still on? So those are the one works. This is a project we started about 10 or 12 years ago. It's a single work of art discussed in detail, book-length form by one author to see and to examine how particular works of art in the post-war period in particular have changed and impacted the way we think about art. So we're taking the work of art as a serious kind of discursive contribution. Down below, you can see examples of, this is one of the books from Exhibition Histories, Festac 77, which is a beautiful reproduction of the history of that show in Nigeria in 1977. That's the journal, this Exhibition Histories. And another series of books we do called Two Works. This is one of the most recent ones. This is where we do the reverse of a one work, where we ask an artist to respond to an important text that has been significant for artists and writers alike. And this one is a young Ecuadorian artist, Estefania Penafal-Loaiza, and she has done a work of art on this famous text by Gayatri Spivak called Can the Subaltern Speak? We also have a number of projects on the go research projects. We have a decolonial project that we are doing in collaboration with the Museum of Art, Sao Paulo, Yaisa Hendelas at Goldsmiths, and also the Decolonizing Art Institute at the University of the Arts London, where we have been hosting 3 international conferences. The most recent one is live at the moment. It's happening twice this week on our new platform called Afterall Art School. I'll show you that in a minute when I share my screen. We have another research project run by my colleague Adina May, Dr. Adina May, and another one of our colleagues, Aju Arma. They're doing a project on the Black Atlantic to see how the slave trade has informed and made sensible many of the ideas that we have about art and internationalism. And we are currently doing a collaboration with Paul Goodwin and Train. We just submitted an Arts Council application for an online training, online residency for artists and writers, using particularly with a reference to a Black artist in the UK, and inviting people to apply to have a year-long residency, learning how to write about a single work of art and also how to make works of art in relationship to a text. So it's kind of taking our one work and our two work model, and we're awaiting news on that grant. And we're pretty excited now. We have 2 new research projects on the go. One is with, as Amy already mentioned, with Amy and Judith from the Center of Fashion Curation, and Vanassis in his Center of, how do you pronounce that? Forgotten the name.
Legata.
Sorry?
It's Legatus, isn't it?
Thank you, Legatus. I knew it started with an L-I-G, I just couldn't remember. And we're doing a project we hope will be about trying to decolonize the way in which works of art are disseminated. We, as Thanasis says, how come nobody at UAL, when they supply Adobe software or to our students, don't start with a deconstruction of Adobe, designed by a bunch of young guys, mainly young guys under 30, living in San Francisco, who have no humanities education, have no notion of decolonization, don't know anything about the way in which social media and electronic software continue to exploit and kill people throughout the world. So we have strategically, with our partners in the Fashion Curation Research Center and Thanasis, we've been keen to work with the art school and university in Kinshasa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is ongoing. And because, I mean, just anecdotally, you probably know that 70% of the world's coltan and other highly valuable minerals and metals that are used in the dissemination for computers, iPhones, and make all of this stuff work. It all comes from there, and in the process of it coming from there, approximately 40,000 people a month have been dying over the last 25 years. So this is World War III. It's the largest cause of death in the world since World War II. Almost nobody speaks about it. Silicon Valley doesn't speak about it because they rely on it. But in the process, all these people are being murdered one way or the other. So we're very keen to work with the artists and designers in Kinshasa, the fashion designers, to try and see how we can decolonize this software, to see how we can make it more equitable and see if there's a way in which artists can intervene rather than just use these things as tools. And one of the problems is that I don't want to contradict Amy, say go on Instagram. Do go on Instagram, but remember, every time you use Instagram, if I can be crude, someone's dying in the world, and they're dying in order for that Instagram to work. And I think that's really important that we bear that in mind. We have two websites. One main website, Afterall, I can share it maybe later, afterall.org. Please surf it, have a look around. And the other platform that we've just started, time. Okay, I'm done. Becky's put me to an end. Afterallartschool.org was what I was saying.
Do finish with that last detail there, Mark, please.
Okay. Afterallartschool.org is a platform where we are currently running our decolonization in the 2020s. It's free. Please log on. There's another one on Thursday. It's in Spanish, Portuguese, and English. We've managed to make Zoom work in 3 languages. We have, it actually works. And we have participants from all over the world, particularly in the global South. And on that note, I'm going to pass over back to you, Becky.
Hi, everybody. I'm Cathy Lane. I
should have introduced you, Cathy. Sorry.
Go on, introduce me then.
Well, I introduce Cathy Lane, a great colleague sitting in front of an enormous bookshelf, and I'm looking forward to hearing you.
Okay, thanks, Mark, and thanks to everyone else. Yes, I'm Cathy Lane. I'm the Director of Creative Research into Sound Arts Practice, and I am about to share my screen. Okay, so CRiSAP grew out of the development starting in 1998 of courses in sound arts and design at London College of Communication. When we look back at the resources available to us at that time, particularly about the texts about sound practices and sound itself, we're amazed at both the scarcity and the narrowness of what can only be described as a handful of historical surveys. So when CRiSAP was first established in 2005, creative work with sound and the whole area of sound art was thought of as an emerging discipline, drawing on a diverse body of sounding practices from the global north, traditions which include radio art, free music improvisation, synthesis, sound poetry, and site-specific work. Sound art in the UK was little understood and generally seen to be synonymous with either music technology, electroacoustic music composition, beat-based ambient music, or sound for film and radio programmes. And while what we do does share some similarities sometimes with some of those practices, as a group of practice-based researchers in a large visually focused arts university, our aim has been much more to explore the rich complexities and possibilities of sound as an artistic practice, and to play our part in broadening and deepening the discursive context in which sound art is practiced, as well as building an ear-centred community both inside and outside academia. So in the intervening 15 years, CRiSAP has been at the forefront of practice-led and practice-based research into what sound can tell us, what sound can do or express, and how it can be used to reveal more about the world than with our relationships with humans and the more than human. Over this time, understanding of the sonic as a methodology and as the basis of creative practice and as a sensory mode offering new insights and knowledge pathways has increased enormously, to the extent that it's now possible to say that sound arts are no longer emerging, but have emerged and are rapidly changing. So CRiSAP is a research community currently comprised of 10 members of various fractionalities, all of whom are teaching or who have taught on the BA and MA Sound Arts courses at LCC, 12 research students, 16 completed research students, 1 current and 7 past postdoctoral researchers, and a number of friends and associates, many of whom contribute to undergraduate and postgraduate teaching. Our research themes have emerged according to shared interests, often collaboratively and critically developed and disseminated through a mixture of public and centre-based debate and discussion, exhibition, curation, performance and publication. They are extremely varied, as you can see, but share what my colleague, Professor Salome Vogelin, has termed a sonic sensibility, and this drives and unites our work. So for the short remainder of this session, I want to discuss the development of just 1 or 2 of these themes, old and new. In 2005, our already established research interest in sound and the environment and sound and language led to us collaborating on what we now realise was a seminal event. The Sound and Anthropology, Body, Environment and Human Sound Making Conference was organised as the culmination of a collaboration between CRiSAP and the Department of Social Anthropology at St Andrews University. This collaboration featured a joint doctoral training programme for our respective PhD students. Kolkata-based Bengali singer, writer and researcher Moushumi Bhowmik has, among others, repeatedly talked about that conference as a catalyst for her awareness of the significance and potential critical content of both sound and listening, which helped her reframe her approach to her work with the Travelling Archive, an online space of listening to songs and stories from the Bengali diaspora. Moushumi has maintained a special relationship with CRiSAP ever since then. However, that collaboration and event also had a significant effect on the development of CRiSAP and the way that sound arts have been understood and practiced at UAL. So for the remainder of this presentation, I want to try and trace some of those changes manifested through our changing research focuses within distinct areas of practice. We've always been interested in place, sonic placemaking or sound in the environment, often investigated through field recording, the recording of environmental sound. This has been manifested differently from, say, the wildlife recordist's interest in pristine recordings of a specific bird species, and focused much more on aspects of people's relationship to their environment and the other species that we share it with, and has been investigated as an artistic practice collaboratively as part of the Sounds of Europe network and through public events, including a major 2-day symposium at the British Library and various publications. Some of our research into sound in the environment is specifically and geographically located. For example, the long-running Favourite Sounds research project, which asks city inhabitants to identify their favourite sounds, which was simply originally collected and released on CD or online, and have subsequently formed an archive of changing relationships to urban environments. Or my own long-term investigation of the landscape and culture of the islands of the Outer Hebrides through recorded sound, including interviews and oral history archival material disseminated through composed sound work and scholarly writing. Or air pressure, a long-term collaboration between Angus Carlisle and anthropologist Rupert Cox, which by the way began at the aforementioned Sound and Anthropology Conference, which focuses on the last farming family living within the concrete and steel infrastructures of Narita Airport, Tokyo, where noise of taxiing and taking off and landings exerts a constant pressure from dawn until dusk. Some focus more on generic environments such as hospital wards and the relationship of noise to sleep, rest, treatment and recovery. However, increasingly over time, this research has focused on the unseen, and I want to illustrate this through the research projects of 4 recent PhD students, leading, for example, to the development of new practices and methods that are needed in order to investigate invisible configurations such as media infrastructures, or the proliferation of signal density in the smart environments of the near future, or ideas of inner sounds, the sounds in our thoughts, the sounds we hear in our mind, and how they affect our experience of physical, real sounds. Or the effects of the disappearance of keynote sounds, such as coastal foghorns, which used to dominate coastal neighbourhoods. Somewhere over time, our focus on place and environment being researched and disseminated through sound shifted to an emphasis on the research methodology itself, in this case sonic, in other words, listening. This shift happened gradually, almost imperceptibly over a period of time, as research projects developed that tried to frame listening as an artistic practice. And again, I'll illustrate this through recent PhD research projects, such as investigating how the practices, theories and philosophies of listening within sound art can inform creative practice, and, finding them lacking, proposes an extended practice of listening that operates beyond sound art, drawing on dialogical and participatory arts practices, communication study, philosophy, gender theory, literary theory and artistic practice. Or extending existing listening methodologies, such as Pauline Oliveros' practice of deep listening, to investigate the strategic compositional practices of contemporary female experimental composers. Or listening to the listening of others, in this case, collectors of oral history related to the partitions of the Indian subcontinent. And practice-based research, which addresses the uneven distribution of listening and being listened to, following intersections of oppression and privilege. The burgeoning of research into listening, a methodology which is, of course, very difficult to document, has been accompanied by an investigation of discipline-specific applied listening methodologies in a variety of publications, including on listening and listening to noise and silence, and the funded Listening Across Disciplines research project, which investigates how listening works to create new knowledge. So I've tried to give you a tiny flavour of CRiSAP through just one small section of our research. Much more can be found on our website, and in particular, I want to draw your attention to our current online exhibition, Acts of Air, Reshaping the Urban Sonic, which invites you to reshape your urban sonic by enacting one or more of 14 sound works directly in urban spaces. And on March the 26th, our new book, Sound Arts Now, will be published. The book is a series of interviews with an extended afterwards chapter, which reflects on the changes and developments that we have witnessed in sound arts over the last 2 decades of working and collaborating on artistic, curatorial, academic and educational projects. Thank you very much for listening. I'm now going to stop sharing my screen and introduce Brigitte Lardinois of the Photography and the Archive Research Centre. Sorry, Brigitte, over to you.
Thank you very much, Cathy, and for a wonderful presentation. My name is indeed Brigitte Lardinois, though it was for a while a little bit spelt wrong on the slide. I am indeed the director of the Photography and Archive Research Centre, which, as Oriana mentioned, is the oldest research center at UAL, started in 2003 by Julian Rodriguez and Val Williams. Val stepped back from PARC in August 2018, and I was then asked to, I then took over as director, and I really set about revitalizing the space first. Next slide, please. What PARC is situated in the workshop block of LCC, Elephant and Castle, and it was actually used for a while to store the archives that had been accumulated over the years. And when I took over, it struck me that those archives weren't kept in the best conditions, and that there is slightly something strange about having PARC in the same building, but actually not more than a couple of one step away from the special collections that sometimes referred to as the Kubrick archive. So what I did was forge a much closer link with Sarah Maherta at the Special Collections and Archive Center, and through that brought our two organizations much closer together, but also freed up a room which is on the left from where you see the flowers, which is a projection room. And then what you see through the door there is a little admin hub where both the PARC and the CRiSAP administrators sit together. And then we also have a big meeting room, which is used for meetings for our members and PhD students, but also for people like the Ref Committee and the College Research Center. And through opening the center up like that, we gained much better contacts with our colleagues. And I had the privilege of being able to use that space for exhibitions. The plan was to have 4 exhibitions a year, not sometimes for members, sometimes for people from outside. We even had a MA academics in practice who had an exhibition with us. And obviously during lockdown, all that had to stop. During lockdown, actually, one of the great things that happened to us was that Mark Seeley, from better known as the director of Autograph, joined PARC as a research fellow. And with him, we are organizing these regular webinars called Decolonizing the Lens, where he is in conversation with various Black artists and curators, and that's proven to be a really great way of reaching people, and they are very popular. There's one tomorrow when he's in conversation with Joy Gregory. And another, I'm just giving examples of the things that we're doing. Another project, next slide, is born during lockdown. A year ago, I was, as everyone is, on social media regularly, and there were all these lovely pictures of beautiful, clean water in Venice and goats in Wales and all that. And I thought that this lockdown was only going to be for a couple of months. And I had this idea of a project where you saw all the silver lining, all these great things that were happening to the planet. But of course, very soon we realized it was not a silver lining, and a lot of people were dying. And a very good colleague of mine and a core member of PARC, Paul Lowe, who I had been speaking to about this project, said that there was an AHRC bid to create projects around the COVID pandemic. What we decided to do was to try to bring together all those big bodies of work that are being generated, Derby format, 50,000 Instagram pictures, Historic England, 3,000 images from both professional and amateur photographers, big National Portrait Gallery project, and create a lasting archive of images of what it was like during the pandemic, because it's a very, very important time in photography when all over the world people are sharing not similar but experiences that relate to each other, and amateurs as well as professionals are using this. I see that I only have 2 minutes left and I have so much to tell you. Anyway, we're working on that COVID bid. And this is an exhibition that we've done for format, totally digital. And I promised that I would also show some little films. I only have time for one little film, which is the complete opposite of what you see here. This is a digital show. What I want to end on is a little film of a project that I've been engaged in for 7 years, and which is a research project to die for, and very much photography and the archive. And with that, I would like to end. Thank you.
I was amazed that this purports to be the oldest photographic studio, not just in the UK, but in the world.
To bring all those historical pictures to view in the street where they were taken, it's quite genius in a way.
You've got people who have lived in Lewes a long time, talking to people who are visiting. Even though these are old photographs, it's a very contemporary feel.
They're good, aren't they?
They're very good.
They're brilliant. We love them, yes.
We're reaching so many people, and people are getting such a lot out of it.
Coming into this studio, frankly, it's like stepping back into a Jane Austen novel.
We have over 100,000 glass plates and 200,000 other images. What's amazing is that we have all the paperwork that goes with it, the negative books, the ledgers, the account books. They never threw anything away.
The only thing I don't want to do is smile.
I'd love to have been taught how to use this place by my great-granddad. Probably contravening health and safety by not using a full protective bodysuit and breathing apparatus, but never mind, eh?
With this archive, we are able to reconstruct a portrait of an English market town from the beginning of photography right till now.
You have a real feeling from these photographs, the spirit of Tom Paine, a kind of an anti-establishmentarianism, which I think makes this a very special place.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brigitte. Thank you, everybody. Cathy, Mark, please come back on, put your cameras on and mics on. And if we could take the slide down so we can see everybody, that'd be great. I got goosebumps in that film there, Brigitte. It was amazing.
It is amazing. And actually, this film was made quite early on. By the way, it's in Lewes in East Sussex. And we now know there are 200,000 intact glass plates. This film was made quite early on when we didn't quite understand the numbering yet. And the wonderful thing was I was the first scholar who was allowed in there. So it's really a dream project.
Amazing. I'm just here to help chair this session, really. It's up to you guys to maybe chat amongst yourselves, ask questions. I'll help pick up questions from the chat bar from the audience, of course. But there seem to be some really strong common threads there between you. Does anybody want to kick off? No, Mark's not going to talk to me because I asked him to wrap his 10 minutes up.
I was happy when you said stop. I was like, I didn't realize it went so fast, so I was happy to stop. But then I got thrown because I forgot to introduce Cathy. So
I thought it was fascinating what you were saying about, using the impact of using Instagram and social media, and know a little bit about the work at Legatus by Thanasis, but really understanding how the digital world works in terms of impacts from a sustainability point of view, of course, I find fascinating, as well as political. But you've all got, go on.
Well, I'm just saying there's multiple ways of looking at that. I mean, you could say that 95% of our students, I don't know what, probably 100%, can expect to generate most of their activity either on Facebook, Instagram, various social media programs. That's kind of where their work exists, how people see it. So there's that. There's a kind of hegemony of practice, of technology, which, as we've argued as a team, that this has a kind of leveling out where things start to all look the same and start to feel the same because people kind of mimic each other, and there's a kind of algorithm that various algorithms, some of them internally, some of them machinic, that end up us all producing more or less the same thing this way. There are two other things that are important. One is that the colonial way in which, the neo-colonial way in which young artists and artists, all of us, can go around the world now in a second and steal ideas and pictures and images and thoughts from any country in the world, especially in the global south, and then just redeploy it without any kind of understanding of how it got there and who made it and why it was made and what were the conditions under which it was made and how many, what kind of income those people had who did that, all these things. So we've all become neo-colonial, all of us, all artists and designers have become neo-colonialists through our use of international thoughts and ideas and imagery just by cruising. In a single day, you can travel the whole global south and steal 100 different thoughts, ideas, and images and provide no understanding of where they came from. This has gone on since the beginning of modern art, of course, but it's accelerated. And the third and final thing, and then I'll just stop, is the extraction economy. That nearly all of this material comes from the global south, and literally hundreds of people are dying every day because of extraction. So, to give, as Thanasis says, to give students Adobe and say go ahead and do it, it's scandalous not to start with why Adobe is a problem or why Instagram is a problem. So we want all of our students to start at day one, knowing that all of these mediums are compromised, and they're compromised in really hideous ways sometimes. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Really interesting, Mark. I would say that in the sound world, you know, I hope I've kind of tried to suggest a kind of shift, certainly within the practices in CRiSAP, from a very sort of technologized kind of engagement with sound to a more kind of visceral engagement with sound, you know, sort of without using any specific kind of technologies. But I would say that within sound, it's sort of sound has lagged behind on a lot of these sustainability issues, as far as I know, and that people are only just thinking about sort of auditing things like, you know, portable recorders, finding out what sort of extractive technologies have been used for some of those, to make some of those machines. But what's really interesting about it is also the politics of, say, recording sound compared with the politics of making images is so different. I think that it's very difficult to bring out a camera, for example, in a lot of different situations and start taking pictures, but it's still moderately acceptable to bring out a microphone and to just start recording. And this is one of the things that we've been looking at as well, is sort of recording as an extractive technology in itself. And when you actually make a recording somewhere, what effect does that have on whatever is left behind?
Thank you, Cathy. That's interesting that there are commonalities coming out already, and you know, from wearing my sustainability hat, it relates completely to TED's 10 and things that we've been doing with design, where we've been trying to address the issues around ethical production and sweatshop labor, carbon impacts from every single decision that gets made in the supply chain and life cycle, cultural appropriation. So actually social media is a way that links us all with these sort of ways that we connect, and understanding the ethics and the impacts and the undertaking really when we do go online and interact that way. But Brigitte, there's a question from the audience actually about the archives and working in archives. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more from you about that. But they're all also asking, you know, how is it that students can access sort of rare materials in archives at UAL and in other places? How do you go about that as a researcher?
Well, that's a really fundamental question, and of course there are many, as I tried to show in that very short 10 minutes. There are such very, very different archives. I've shown the two extremes, and to pick up a little bit of what was said earlier, that the exhibition that we curated online for Format Festival a couple of weeks ago is material that comes from an open call on Instagram, which brought in 50,000 images, self-generated images from 90 countries. One of the ideas of this new archive is that we will be a portal for a lot of those images so that people can access them online. So that's going to be a no-brainer, you know, that can be done. And I understand all the ethical problems, but you know, this is an example of an online archive that will be accessible to everyone if we get the Wellcome Trust funding. And the Reef Archive is exactly the opposite spectrum. This is an archive that's been in the family for 4 generations. They never let anyone in. It took me a year of going for cups of tea every Wednesday morning before they allowed me, before they trusted me. And that archive will never be open to the public. But what we are doing is, with the help of 50 local volunteers, we are writing, digitizing the ledgers so that you can search online the name of a person or a place where you want to be, And then we can find through the numbering system, because all those little boxes are exactly numbered, we can find the plate that goes with it, and that can then be made accessible. So whereas that's the other side of the spectrum. There is also the archive that I refer to in LCC, where the Kubrick collection is, the Sarah Maherta's center. That is accessible. You make an appointment, you tell them what you want to see, you can online see what there is in that archive, and make an appointment to go and see what you want to research. Often it's just writing to archives, being very clear what it is you want, not just I would like to rummage, because there are not enough hours in the day for curators to deal with that. But specific questions, there are very few archives you can't access. We are, and very quickly, because I didn't have time to say that, one of the things I'm exploring with the with the Dean of Media, Steve Cross, is a strategic partnership with the Imperial War Museum, where we will be working with them to help our students get access to that enormous archive. And in return for that, we are helping them make their digital content available for students. So there are all sorts of different ways, and all of them equally fascinating.
Thanks, Brigitte. I think, Cathy, you had a point about archives as well.
Well, I didn't have time to talk about it really in the presentation, but CRiSAP have also been really actively involved in archives. And what we've been doing really is trying to bring archives to the university. And the university's got a very large collection of archives split between the colleges and related to all sorts of areas. But the ones that we've been specifically related to are the Lardinois archive, which is an archive of an exhibition of women's experimental music that happened in the early 200s. The Lindsay Cooper archive, and the London Musicians Collective archive, which is a sort of cultural collective that lost its funding a few years ago, all of which can be accessed, but all of which, of course, are in totally different states of accessibility. You know, some have been catalogued in some way, some are not catalogued at all. You know, they can be accessed, but they can't necessarily be made sense of without huge amounts of work. And we're always looking for people to come and do that work, basically.
That's a really good point, because there's a question about, is it possible, do you think, for researchers to work remotely with the research centres? The question was actually about working with CRiSAP, but, you know, how does that look for the future? That would be great, wouldn't it, to have more remote research fellows?
I mean, at the moment, just to say to that, I mean, our PhD students, probably like everybody's, rarely seem to be, well, the critical mass of them rarely seem to be in the same country as us. Some of them are roaming around the world trying to get access to various archives. Some of them are actually based in other countries. And in a way, we in CRiSAP, we have a monthly or 2 weekly, depending on where we are in the year, sort of research get together for PhD students and members where we discuss research topics. And they have been better attended since lockdown than they were when they were after work on a Wednesday night in the LCC building, which is amazing.
Great. So just to conclude, really better for PhD students, not quite so straightforward for actual sort of paid posts, which has, I think, tax implications if you're employing researchers that are based overseas, but that's another conversation. But just want to say thank you very much to you all, and yeah, look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go straight into part 3 now then, and this is identity and community. And first up we have Professor Paul, I've forgotten your name, Paul, it's just gone.
Paul Goodwin.
Thank you. Yeah, low blood sugar at this time of day. Paul Goodwin from Train, over to you.
Thank you, Becky. So I'm going to be joined today in talking about Train by Dr. Michael Asbury, who is one of the founding members of Train. So I'm going to hand over to him first, and then I'll take over the second part of the presentation. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Tommaso, for the technical support. And yeah, great to be here. Could I have my first slide, please? I'd like to very briefly mention some of the precedents for TRAIN, the Center for Transnational Art, Identity and Nation, highlighting some of our achievements over the first 10 years before passing on to Paul Goodwin, who will kind of carry on speaking about the current goals of the center since he has taken over as director about 6 years ago, I think. TRAIN has a long and very rich history, which I'm going to fail to do justice here. I'm just warning you in advance. I wanted to start with this image. It's a work by Inka Shonibari entitled Hopscotch, and it was commissioned for Other Modernities, an exhibition Oriana Baddeley and myself curated in 2000. And in a sense, Oriana really should be here talking about the kind of early stages of TRAIN, as she was co-director with Toshio initially. But so again, apologies for kind of not doing justice to the narrative. The exhibition of the Modernities was organized in conjunction with a panel of the same title at the International Congress of Art Historians, which took place that year in London. Ideas around modernity and its re-evaluation, sorry, particularly from the perspective of colonial legacies within the so-called peripheral regions of the world, were at the heart of concerns leading to the formation of TRAIN. Initially in the 1990s, this took place through collaborative projects such as Modernity and Identity and the British Empire, a project that kind of began, I think, one of the first at the then London Institute, that was a kind of a cross-college collaboration between Camberwell and Chelsea. The question of empire and the need to reframe the ways in which it featured in standard historical accounts, particularly within the field of art and design, is as current in the sense today as it was at the time, the late 90s. So a strong exchange, therefore, already existed with pioneering work on what today would be described as a kind of a decolonizing the British art scene. And here partners such as Third Text and Iniva are noteworthy examples of the kind of exchanges and collaborations and contributions we were making around the time, myself as a PhD student still. So could I move to the next slide, please? TRAIN emerged in the wake of the Modernity and Identity in Mexico, India, and Japan collaborative project with the University of Sussex. And here we have an image of a conference held in Coimbra in Portugal, which I believe is where Paul finds himself at the moment, featuring the founding TRAIN directors, Toshio and Oriana, PhD students, and a very young looking, I think you can hardly see me, research fellow stretching my neck at the back. TRAIN was then founded at the moment of transition from the London Institute to UAL, the University of the Arts, and became representative in a way of how the new university saw itself moving into the future as a transnational, diverse, and critical in its discourse and approach towards art and design education. From 2004, the year TRAIN was founded, several funded projects emerged over the years through TRAIN, and I'll just list a few very quick examples. Forgotten Japanisms, Meeting Margins. There was a Fulbright Distinguished Scholar Residency Scheme which was connected to TRAIN, and more recently projects such as Black Artist and Modernism, which was led by Sonia Boyce and got a lot of attention in the news and in the media. Could I move on to the next slide, please? Train went on to partner with institutions such as Tate on several occasions, transnational correspondence, for example, around the exhibition Eliot Sika, the Mirascendo, Sildo Meirelles, Transnational Cities, which was organized by Toshio, Black Artists and Modernism as well engaged with Tate, and we have current students researching with Tate Britain. And also I'd like to mention Carol Tulloch's curatorial presence, both at the V&A and also as a professor at UAL. Such partnerships continue to date with the World in Public Cultures, for example, which is the current project Paul is leading, and I'm sure he'll talk about it. And events such as this are archived in our YouTube channel. And here we have snippets from a conference on accompanying the exhibition at Tate Modern on Mirascendo back in 2013. Could I move on to the next slide, please? So Train has had a long track record in bringing world-class artists and scholars to be in touch with UAL students and staff through such projects as a Gasworks international residency program that we ran a few years ago, visiting scholars that we continuously have. We currently have one from Rio de Janeiro, Felipe Scovino, and associate PhD students who regularly spend time with us at Train. We also have Train open lectures, which I'm sure everyone's heard about, which is kind of the public-facing side, seminars and reading groups. Members are themselves directly involved within the curriculum at UAL, and here I could mention David DeBosa, who runs the MA Curating and Collections at Chelsea, Lucy Steeds in her role between Train and Afterall, who runs the renewal program for PhD students, Pratap Rugani, who is Associate Dean of Research at LCC, amongst other functions and positions, Georgia Bartlett in her role at LCF, Jane Collins at Wimbledon, who also edits the Journal for Theatre and Performance Design, and so on. Next slide, please, and I'm finishing. As an example of our direct engagement with artists from around the world, I chose a slide of Ana Maria Maiolino, who held in 2008 a workshop and an exhibition at Camberwell, engaging students and staff alike. Her work explores transnational migration and female subjectivity as her recent 2019 retrospective exhibition at the Whitechapel showcase, and that received a lot of attention in the media. And so as a kind of a closing remarks and passing on to Paul, could I have the next slide, please? In the spirits of our continuously evolving themes within Train, I end with an example of a graphic work by artist Detanico and Lain, featured here in a flyer for a curating symposium in 2005. And the same work is now in its object form, exhibited, I think, at the Sao Paulo Biennial, now features as a kind of the main image on our website, which I invite you all to visit. So Paul, if you could carry on, and thanks very much. And we look forward to questions.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. I just want to speak about how Train has evolved, and then run through some current projects and networks that we're involved in. So to follow up from Michael, Train really started as a critique of global discourse from 1989, really, and the need for discussions around transnational questions and global questions in the art world at that time. Train advanced the argument at that time that West-centric art histories need to be decentered beyond the global north, and that national authenticity in art is outmoded. And that we advanced the argument that there were multiple modernisms and alternative art histories that developed in parallel and in dialogue with Western modernity. This was a new argument at the time in art schools, and this has been accepted in the wider art world, although there is still work to be done in embedding this in the art school curriculum. Now, the main tool of inquiry of Train's research at that point was art history and what you might call post-critical museology. Since becoming director in 2015, a new new set of issues have emerged. So there have been global demands for decolonization, social justice, Black Lives Matter, environmental catastrophe, mass urbanization and migration, the growth of authoritarian populisms, the rise of big data and surveillance capitalism. So new models are needed to address this. How can we address these live and interconnected complex issues from the art school? I've argued that we need to activate the trans. This means directly engaging these issues of transnational social justice through a closer alignment of our research with activisms, practice-based and creative and artistic methods, and a clearer mission to advocate for what I would like to call intersectional transnational social justice. So just to go through some of the slides, you can see here on the left, some of the research themes that we're engaged in. I won't read them out. And then there's some of the core questions that Train has been involved in and we are still working on. Next slide, please. Again, here some, Michael mentioned some of the projects that we've been involved in, Black Artists in Modernism, a project by Tokyo Futures by Toshia Watanabe, the former Train director. Tate Encounter was an important collaboration with Tate, British Individual Culture. We did some major research on Maud Salter with Deborah Cherry, Performing Romani Strategies and Critique with Jane Collins, and Birth of the Cool, Style Narratives in the African Diaspora, which is a book project by Carol Tullock. Next slide, please. Black Artists in Modernism was a really important project that has kind of continued to influence and questions around collections in museums. And indeed, Susan Locke, who is the first director of the Institute for Decolonizing Arts, was a co-I on that project. Next slide, please. So activating the trans, as the way that I described it, is my kind of vision for the way that Train is transforming. Trans really refers to, trans as in transnational, transcultural, transhistorical, really means a state of flow, the transformation from one state to another. And activating the trans for me means opening up the transnationals for readings, theories, and strategies coming from the familiar discourses beyond the West. How can a radical, decolonizing, non-patriarchal vision of trans be developed in relation to forms of theory which have been relatively marginal to the concerns of art until recently? And so we're exploring this through modes of collaboration and strategies of pedagogical intervention. Next slide, please. Next slide. So Train has been, the slide doesn't seem to be working at the moment. There should be some information about networks. So this slide is really referring to the networks that we're engaged in. Okay, so we've got the mission statement. We've evolved a mission statement to reflect some of the concerns that we've been talking about, and which we worked on in Away Day in Paris. And some of these, I won't read them all, but we will engage in current urgencies through a transformative agency that embraces teamwork, subversion, and future-focused strategies. We'll focus on questions on activism with historical awareness in a global multilingual environment. And there's some others there you can see too. The next slide, please. So we've been involved in a number of networks, one of which is, Michael mentioned, the World in Public Cultures Project, which is a network involving museums and universities in Europe and North America, which I'm leading. UAL is leading on that project, and which is really working with Thanasis Dilys and Dr. Maribel Urbanija to develop a major database of information about how global narratives are being read and contested within museums and universities. Last slide, please. And then finally, just a couple of projects that Train is working at the moment. One which is teaching in the curriculum, which is Monuments, Museums and Myths, the Colonial Legacy and the Modern Nation, which is a seminar series that works with the MA in Fine Arts at Chelsea, led by Michael Asbury, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sao Paulo in Brazil, and also many of Train members have contributed to, and also a project by Nella Milic as a Train associate and Evelina Warner around post-socialism in art. So that's just to give you a flavour of the directions that we're going. I think international networks, we're scaling up our activities and addressing questions of intersectional, transnational social justice. Thank you.
So we'll just introduce the next and final research centre to present then is Design Against Crime Research Centre and Professor Lorraine Gammon and Adam Thorpe.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, hi. Okay, so as you know, I've been working with the Design Against Crime Research Centre at Central St Martin's for over 20 years. Adam and I co-direct it. And today we're going to try and speak about some of the work that the centre's delivered, not just led by us, but also led by Marcus Wilcox, who's been with the team for well over 20 years. Next slide. So we're a small team. And there's been some discussions. I'm just going to try and add to it a little bit about, how centres emerged. So DAC's been going. I started working on crime with students and projects in 1996. It was in 1999 that I founded the initiative, which I think was the first design initiative that came forward. And it was about 2005 that we became a centre. But we're, it looks like there's loads of us, but we're a very small it's a very small team. We collaborate with lots of externals, including the DCIS network. And we work with communities to democratise innovation involving people that experience crime problems in making sense of them and finding solutions. And in that way, we innovate democracy. We find new ways to involve the people affected by decisions in decision making. And this is the crux of our crime focus, really. Next slide. So, the projects that we've run over 20 years, there are so many, but, where we can, we have particularly tried to address sustainable development goals. Next slide. And for us, strong partnership working makes all the difference. And so we've been blessed with funding and securing funding to run the projects, but it's the actual partnerships that have been more significant for us. Next slide. And so, as you can see, we've adapted the, Design Council 204 double diamond process, and mainly our approach is user-centered or participatory design focus. Next slide. But we involve many actors in the design of products, systems, services, environments, things really. And, when we're working on crime, our centre draws on crime science theories, particularly from situational crime prevention, from crime prevention through environmental design, and other frameworks that many of them who have been developed by Paul Ekbom, who's very well regarded in his field and remains with us. And DAC is active in research, knowledge exchange, teaching, outreach, and we're very proud that for over 20 years we have worked closely with courses and students on many research-led design briefs. And many of our students and staff, have gone on to do big things. And so we're very proud of that. And certainly our action research produces design benchmarks, design resources, exhibitions and publications. Next slide. So here are some of our co-design projects, like Designs Against ATM Crime, Bag Theft, bike theft, as well as furniture and co-design with prisons that can reduce vandalism and self-harm. And we've been interested in perpetrator techniques because to design against crime, you have to know how it happens. But we learned really quickly that crime problems mask bigger issues. And that most of our work really is challenging some of the definitions of crime. And certainly by involving prisoners in designing against crime, we want to make the point that people are part of the solutions as well as the crime problems, and that to change things, you really need to change your thinking. Next slide. We create resources, too many to talk about, but we want others to do what we're doing with us and understand the issues in design against crime. Next slide. And all our approaches to crime have been applied in other social design challenges and contexts, which I hope Adam will speak about for a bit. So over to you, Ad.
Thanks, Lorraine. Yeah, so Design Against Crime Research Centres splits its work into 3 strands of activity. One of them is around public space, led by our colleague Marcus Wilcox. And there's Crime and Justice, that's led by Lorraine, and a strand around public and social innovation. So the public space strand of our work applies our participatory design approach to the co-creation of more social and safer spaces. The work cross-cuts with the crime and justice and public social innovation strands, and it applies and develops knowledge and tools through collaborative projects that promote inclusion, safety and conviviality in the process of tackling inequalities, fear and criminal opportunities in public space. So this strand of work is opportunity-led as opposed to risk-led, which is typical of crime prevention through environmental design. So it's focused more on what people want more of, not just on what people want less of, i.e. crime. It emphasises the promotion of social and convivial use of public space through design, as opposed to having an overemphasis on the mitigation of the antisocial. It contributes to develop social and spatial ties, which foster what Robert Sampson calls collective efficacy, which in turn promotes more resilient communities. And it explores agonism in public space through place prototyping, where we work with multiple publics to identify how a wider range of voices can more actively inform the evolution of safe, welcoming environments. So one example of this work is this project Confident, Vibrant Oslo, which was delivered with the Oslo Institute of Transport Economics and the City of Oslo. The brief was to develop street furniture as one of a number of what the city called confidence building measures that sought to make a safer and more environmentally and socially sustainable Oslo. The work here delivered an opportunity to use the social safer approach throughout the process, and it served to reinvigorate a less popular neighbourhood of the city that was previously associated with concerns around fear of crime. Fear of crime. Evaluation of this project showed that the use of that part of the city had increased by welcome uses and welcome users, and there was no reported increase in criminal or antisocial behaviour. Another example of this strand of work is the My Mural project, which is one of a number of projects that are delivered under the theme of visual voices. This one particularly is seed funded by the Mayor of London's office with support from the Artist Stick and the London Community Foundation. My Mural supports residents to co-curate their local environments by connecting them with experienced street artists. This approach has proved popular. It's one of several platforms that the public space strand delivers. A lot of the work that's delivered is local to Central St Martin's, as well as being further afield. Now I'm going to pass back to Lorraine to speak a bit more about the crime and justice strands.
Okay, I'm going to just focus a little on the prison work, but I wanted to say that the crime and justice strand, as you've seen earlier, you know, has an aspect where we're moving from crime towards this notion of social safety. And the My Mural project you just see has an element of design justice. We want, you know, council tenants to have be part of the decision-making process, to be able to say what goes on their walls, not just left to somebody else. And this idea of involving people in a different way has really, really been central to the prison work. And so in about 2016, Dax set up a studio at HMP Thameside to run an 8-week design thinking and making course for prison industries. Next slide. It was funded by the HRC, and the course took inmates through the double diamond design process. We mentored by students as well as students that volunteers we brought in. We, amazingly taught creative skills really fast to prisoners to generate anti-theft design prototypes. You can see this is an 8-week course, and they generated these bags that they designed to defeat crime very, very quickly and to visualize their ideas. Next slide. We created 23 educational techniques to help inmates that we also trialed in India. Next slide. And what we found was that the men took to the project particularly well, but we didn't really, we weren't setting out to try and turn the inmates into designers, but we realized that some of the processes in design are incredibly enterprising and build resilience, and we wanted to share those with the inmates for life outside. And certainly it met with a lot of their aspirations about setting up businesses. The feedback on the project from them was exceptional. Next slide. And so we exhibited the work, not just, it was a really difficult exhibition, one of the most difficult, because we had to count the nails into prison and out of the things that we built. But the point was to show the prison staff as well as men's families and friends what these guys have been up to. And that at the heart of this prison work, it's about what is Shabarina talks about as desistance, like men owning and being able to talk about what they're doing in a different way, being able to change their narrative is key for desistance. And this project was very heartening in terms of the steps it took to help these guys towards that. Next slide. So we tried, we bid for funding because that's part of what we do, to try and do the same process with cell furniture. We wanted to involve prisoners in designing their own furniture, and certainly we wanted to do that because most of the furniture is awful. It's made of MDF. It's terrible for the environment. There was a sustainable prison initiative as part of this. Next slide. And we did loads of research. I mean, we went to about 10 different prisons. We interviewed everybody. I was just horrified at the vocational learning that some of the men were being given, because those machines will be out of date before they're let out of prison. So what they're being taught in prison, to get jobs, appeared to me to be not only unaspirational, not everyone wants to be a forklift truck driver, but certainly really not going to last. Next slide. And so with the furniture project, we involved these guys in envisioning and helping us to create new ideas for what was needed. And we used lots of different techniques that I can't summarize here because there's no time, but like stickers, because people were nervous about drawing, to customize things. And we got them to talk about their lives in great detail so we could develop personas of different types of uses in cells and mini design briefs. And what came out were all sorts of different questions about what was needed, like chairs, for example, in cells were very, very unhelpful and uncomfortable. And so we started making different rough prototypes about different types of chair. Now you see this existing plastic chair on the left. It's the most hated item in prison. When we interviewed the men, it came up over and over again as something they hate. So what we tried to design was a chair that could flip, based on the men's direction and prototyping. So the flip chair, which is now being prepared to be rolled out in prison, can turn over. It's in a small space. It can offer 2 seat heights. Next slide. And what we learned from all this work is that it's possible to design against crime with prisoners to ensure their creativity is part of the solution, not just the problem. And that prisoners are a massive source of untapped creativity. I mean, we got in on this one because suicide and self-harm was up. And, the system is so depressing. And often, the men had failed at school, and their feedback suggested to us that arts classes, arts learning, creative learning really hit the spot in different ways and absolutely could teach different skills. And so what we found was that participatory design could certainly work in prison as long as de-risk spaces and studios are set up, and a lot of care is taken with that. And that design has a role. For me, art is second to nature, that art can make a difference to crime. And art education is already recognised to some extent. I mean, even the government are now talking about how art can make a difference to prisoners' lives. participatory design is a new focus. But it seems to me that co-production in prison would change so much, like it would massively change vocational learning. And so obviously we see a mission in this, and that, you know, we see a mission, but in a very difficult context, that significant systemic change will be needed to make sustainable co-design and co-production possible in prison. Prison's a broken system, and to make a difference, we're going to have to really push hard. I'm going to hand over to Adam now.
Thanks, Lorraine. So I'll briefly talk about the third strand of our work, which is focused on public social innovation. So really working with local government, voluntary and community sector organisations, businesses and citizens to find place-based solutions to local and sometimes scaling out global challenges. We've co-developed a number of different platforms that support a range of different projects over mainly the last 5 years. The first of which is the Public Collaboration Lab, which started as an action research project funded by the AHRC. It was exploring the synergy between the objectives of local government, so improving outcomes for residents, and those of design higher education, so creating learning, research and knowledge exchange opportunities for students and staff. 5 years later, the lab has delivered over 30 collaborative projects, working with staff and students across the university, across CSM and LCC particularly, addressing issues as diverse as overcrowded living, youth enterprise, inclusive growth, healthy diets, social isolation, many diverse topics where we bring the participatory design capacities to work with other non-design experts that contribute the other forms of expertise and knowledge and understanding needed for us to be able to deliver collaborative projects that deliver impactful outcomes. The work's been well received by the partners and participants over the 5 years and has led to further cross-sector collaborations, including Make at Story Garden, which Make at Story Garden is a public space for creative collaboration. It's situated in a meanwhile space that's awaiting development for the extension of the British Library. It delivers workshops and projects that bring people together, share skills and experiences, and respond to local goals and challenges. Make is co-funded by Camden Council, Central St Martin's, Lend-Lease, a local developer, and the Somerstown Community Association, whose premises with the Living Centre are directly across the road. The Make team includes colleagues from Innovation and Business, CSM's technical and teaching staff, as well as researchers from the Design Against Crime Research Centre and also the Social Design Institute. Make supports CSM and UAL's knowledge exchange narrative around public engagement and placemaking. And we're really glad to be working across the university with our colleagues in Camberwell's Playgrounds and also in LCF's Poplar Works to start to understand the similarities and differences between our publicly engaged practices. Linked to Make and a continuation and building on the success of Make is a project called the Public Studio, which is a new initiative working with local partners to prototype a community-based KTP model, so a community-based knowledge transfer partnership model that brings together graduates with students and local young people, also with residents, community leaders, council officers and developers and contractors to implement projects that are addressing right now the twin challenges of post-COVID renewal and disruptive development. So again, this work is delivered in collaboration with CSM's Innovation and Business team, and also specifically Andreas Lang, who's CSM's new lead on knowledge exchange and placemaking. Again, linked to some of this work is an overarching project that we're working on, funded by the European Union's Horizon 2020 programme. This project's called T-Factor. T stands for time or transformation, and it's looking at how we can use the participatory arts and designs approaches within our community of practice across the university, working with our neighbours in local government, the residents, the community organisations, and also the developers to see whether leveraging meanwhile space and meanwhile time for participatory prototyping activities can actually enable the co-production of new futures, as opposed to, we're trying to move from consultation to co-production for more inclusive approaches to regeneration and development. Also, the project gives us an opportunity to work across Europe with 6 different pilot sites that are also communities undergoing quite massive development. 3 of these are City of Bilbao, the Mind Innovation District in Milan Innovation District, and also Trafaria in Lisbon. And these cities and some of their organisations like Nova University in Lisbon are partners of UAL within the Creative Cities work that the international team lead on. So some of our work, we try to weave it into the communities of practice and the ambitions of the university, as well as fundamentally the aims and ambitions of our neighbours and the communities of practice that we've been collaborating with over, well, as Lorraine said, over the last couple of decades, but certainly since we've been in the new location around CSM and in this strand of work over the last 7 or 8 years. So the work that we're doing here, we describe as being infrastructuring. So all of these projects contribute to our understanding around the contribution of participatory arts and design to infrastructuring. So this work of creating the conditions for place-based social innovation. And if we ask ourselves, what is it that we're infrastructuring? What are the conditions for place-based social innovation? Then perhaps what it is that we're infrastructuring is the quadruple helix that's so often referred to in quadruple helix innovation. So infrastructuring the trust, the capacity, and the strategic alignment that works to bring together partners across industry, government, academia, and civil society to share and contribute resources to address complex challenges we face, including those most importantly, perhaps relating to earth and equity.
So to conclude quickly, you know, DAC has been delivering socially responsive design for over 20 years, and we plan to continue. And we'll address equity and earth by exploring and involving our participatory design-led approaches in tricky, socially situated contexts, compromised always by power and politics. And we want to ensure that reciprocity and opportunity for research collaborators and participants is available, and that we can integrate learning recognition and remuneration for communities within our collaborative action. That's something we're working on. And so we're exploring ways that participatory design practice can combine design drivers to contribute to cross-disciplinary and to address climate emergency. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam, Lorraine. Paul and Michael, please come back. For the last few minutes, we'll never be able to do justice in a very quick Q&A to the work of your 2 fantastic centres. A few questions have come in though, and I'm going to help keep the pace here by pitching them. So Paul, there's been a comment about how great the audience found your trans definition as a state of flow. So you may want to say a little bit about that, but also people would like to hear about the Jamaican style.
Sure, thank you, Becky. So trans as flows came from some work I've been doing as part of World in Public Cultures and a paper that I delivered in Ottawa in 2019, where I was thinking about how trans in transnational can be kind of radicalized in a certain way, or kind of moved forward. If you look at the dictionary definition of trans, it actually means moving from one state to another, this kind of sense of fluid and flow. And I felt that was really an important way of thinking about how contemporary art design is moving at the moment, and something that Train, I think, should align with. The second point about Jamaican style is actually, that slide was from a research project and a monograph by Professor Carol Tullock, who's a Train member, who wrote a really important text on called The Birth of the Cool, Style Narratives of the African Diaspora, which focused really on Jamaica and Carol's relationship with Jamaica and some of the objects that form part of Jamaican popular culture, but are kind of like global in a certain way. So it's a really important text, and I urge you all to go and buy the book or have a look at it.
Thank you, Paul. Are there any questions from maybe Paul and Michael to Lorraine and Adam about their work? Not to put you on the spot too much, but I mean, there's other questions actually coming in as well from other directors. Dilys would really like Lorraine and Adam to talk a little bit more about their participatory design methods. And I think ending with you guys being so strong in methods and collaboration, it would be a really nice way to sort of begin to wrap up this event. But tell us a bit more, because it's such a challenge. And one of the reasons, you know, you had so much in your presentation is you're managing all of these different people and questions, and you need so many different ways of working, don't you, now, to work in such a socially engaged way?
We do. Adam, would you like to talk about the T Factor project? Because I think we should end on that.
What I can say about the participatory practices is that within the T Factor project, there's a strand of that work that's led by our colleague, Professor Mick Finch, which is linked to the mapping of a transformation lab. So interestingly, actually, Paul, I love the way in which you frame this understandings around trans and this sort of trans moment, because it absolutely resonates with me, and I think it really works across different contexts. But so in the T Factor project, there is this idea of transformation labs, which are 7 different clusters of expertise internationally from the different partners in the project. And one of those labs is a lab around arts, culture and creativity, which is mapping across some of our colleagues initially around CSM, but if we can find the resource, and we'd like to go further than that, because what we've realized is that within the centres we have we've seen the extraordinary work that goes on, both participatory and otherwise, but also outside of the centres there's a huge amount of participatory practice and publicly engaged practice taking place. And what we've been doing at the moment is mapping that and drawing together the different activities and methods and tools that are being exercised and practiced there. So towards the end of May, we will be sharing some of these findings, and we will be asking our colleagues to sort of talk about the practices that they've shared with us through the research. And so I think that's probably the best opportunity to do justice to a conversation around some of these participatory practices, and we'll make sure that that the invitation to that community of practices and that conversation is extended, and we're really welcome to get the input of our colleagues here around that also. I think that a lot of it though is really about really understanding the power relationships and also how privileged we are. We've got a challenge on at the moment around the T Factor project, which is how can you, I mean, it's the European Union's given the funding to the university and given the funding to the council and the community partners, but ultimately it's the residents that need to lead the process. So how do you catalyse a sort of a bringing together of residents with our academic community in a way that's truly horizontal? Now, how can what can you do about a situation where it needs to be taken, not given? And that's one of the questions that we're really working with at the moment, is sort of that question around what can we do so that things are taken, not given.
Can I just say one thing, which is for Paul, really? I love the trans bit too, and I was struck by the connection between design justice and art justice in a weird way. And there's a book that's from MIT, which, you know, it's by a trans writer, a trans activist. It's about design, but she draws on what I used to use at the women's press in the 80s, which was the matrix of domination. It came from Black feminist writers. And I think that understanding the matrix of a domination and how that impacts on all of us and our communities is massive. And it's certainly something that University of the Arts needs to get to grips with.
Completely agree, Lorraine. Absolutely.
I think we have to end there, but on a really good note, because it is about collaboration, it is about sharing our methods and our best practice and involving everybody in the research, the important research questions that we're all pursuing. So I think I'm going to end by saying thank you to all the centre directors for presenting this afternoon. Thank you to the audience for coming and getting involved and putting some good questions there. And thank you very much to the organisation team behind the event, to Lynn and Tommaso and Oriana, who brilliantly has introduced us and come back to sort of wave us off. But thank you, everybody. And I really hope that this becomes a regular event in some way. We'll discuss, and I hope sort of be on your screens a little bit more often, sharing our research and working together on new ventures, new projects.
And thanks to you, Becky, for all the work you've done in bringing this together and to steering the conversation. So thank you.
Hear, hear.
Great.
Thank you.
Hey, bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Becky.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Becky, and Tommaso and Lynn.
Yeah, thank you to everyone.